Hi, everyone. Welcome to our online event today. We're so glad that you could join us. My name is Sarah Pinkham, and I'm the Exhibition and Engagement Coordinator for the main library gallery at the University of Iowa Libraries. This semester in the gallery, we're featuring an exhibition called Orchestrating Community, the public service of Iowa conductor James Dixon, which was curated by Dr. Sarah Suhadolnik of the UI School of Music and Katie Buhner, director of the Rita Benton Music Library. The exhibit will be open through June 26th here in Iowa City, and the main library gallery is always free, so please stop by and see us if you get the chance. Today, the UI Libraries, the School of Music, and the Quad City Symphony Orchestra are excited to present a panel discussion that will celebrate the orchestra, both past and present, as well as James Dixon's influence as maestro. So thank you to Brian Baxter, Caitlin Lingle, Chelsea Salmons, and the rest of the team at QCSO for partnering with us on this event. And many thanks also to the School of Music and to Tammy Walker for their support. After the planned discussion today, there will be some time for a couple of audience questions, so please feel free to type a question into the Q&A box as we go along. I'll keep an eye on those. And with that, I will introduce today's moderator and panelists, and would like to extend my sincere thanks to them for sharing their stories and their perspectives with us. Sarah Suhadolnik is a musicologist, scholar, and teacher of American music with special interest in jazz and popular music. Much of her research has centered around interconnectedness of music and place. She received her PhD in historical musicology from the University of Michigan and currently serves as assistant professor of instruction at the UI School of Music. Ben Coelho is a Brazilian-born bassoonist, educator, and recording artist whose career spans 5 continents. He's been a professor of bassoon at the University of Iowa since 1998 and is principal bassoonist of the Quad City Symphony Orchestra. A graduate of Purchase College and the Manhattan School of Music with additional study at Indiana University, he's a leading advocate for expanding bassoon repertoire and has released 7 critically acclaimed solo recordings. An award-winning teacher and dedicated academic leader, he has served in multiple administrative roles at the University of Iowa and is vice president of the International Double Reed Society. Hisham Bravo Groover serves as assistant conductor of the Quad City Symphony Orchestra, music director of the Quad City Symphony Youth Ensembles, and assistant professor of music and director of orchestral activities at Augustana College. He's previously held conducting positions with the St. Cloud Symphony Orchestra, Greater Twin Cities Youth Symphonies, the Buffalo Community Orchestra, and several university orchestras and opera programs. His work reflects a commitment to community-centered music making and to developing the next generation of orchestral musicians. Dennis Loftin is a percussionist, pianist, and former member of the Quad City Symphony Orchestra. He served as the orchestra's principal percussionist from 1976 to 2009 and was its operations manager from 1985 to 2005. He was also a 30-year member of the music faculty of Augustana College, teaching percussion, music appreciation, music history, and piano. He later moved to Pennsylvania and served for 10 years as staff accompanist of the music department of Lebanon Valley College. He now lives in Asheville, North Carolina, and holds a bachelor's degree from Wake Forest University and a Master of Fine Arts degree in percussion performance from the University of Iowa, where for 3 years he was a student manager for the University Symphony Orchestra. And his work with James Dixon, first as a student musician at the university and then as a professional colleague and musician in the Quad City Symphony Orchestra, gives him a special perspective on Dixon's legacy. And Mark Russell Smith is in his 18th season as music director and conductor of the Quad City Symphony Orchestra, where his dynamic leadership and artistic vision have brought world-renowned artists, including Yo-Yo Ma, Midori, and Joshua Bell, to the stage. A dedicated educator, he serves as artistic director of orchestral activities at the University of Minnesota and artistic director of the Greater Twin Cities Youth Symphonies. His major projects include internationally acclaimed performances of Britten's War Requiem, Bach's St. Matthew Passion, as well as collaborations with the Joffrey Ballet. He maintains an active guest conducting schedule, appearing with leading orchestras such as the Minnesota Orchestra, St. Louis Symphony, Houston Symphony, and numerous international ensembles. A champion of contemporary music, he's led innovative and new music initiatives and collaborated closely with prominent composers. A graduate of Juilliard and the Curtis Institute, he resides in Minneapolis with his family. So, Sarah, I will turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. We have very much enjoyed being the 2 Sarahs working on this project together. Our larger theme for our conversation today, as a way to remember some of what Dixon, both then and now, is most known for, is programming. right? So something he was known for was balancing programming of the great works of our larger symphonic tradition with lots of new repertoire composed by living composers. So for those that are less familiar with the process of programming for orchestras, we're going to start with a little discussion of what that actually looks like in practice. So Mark, as one of our two conductors on the panel today, can you tell us about what your process looks like for selecting the repertoire for a concert season?
Well, I mean, yeah, that would take like an hour at least. But
Give us
yeah,
the
I mean,
broad strokes at
yeah,
least.
there, browse, yeah. I mean, there are many factors that come to play, and hearing what you described as James Dixon's, ideal programming, I'm very much, we're very much on the same page as far as that goes. Uh, it's about balance. It's about being bringing the tried and true and the beloved cornerstone pieces of our repertoire, of which there are like way more than you can fit in one 6 concert season or 3 6 concert seasons. So it's about keeping those pieces in our public's mind and ears, and kind of keeping track of that while introducing new pieces, while introducing new artists, while maintaining relationships with guest artists who have come and who the audience loved. So, I mean, they're just multitudinous factors. It's really about balance. It's really about, it's both about the individual program and balance within the individual program, because you don't, we very strongly, like Dixon, continue to believe in fostering new works, in commissioning, in supporting new composers, in supporting new works. But you can't have just that on the program. You need the balance. And so balancing the tried and true with the new within a program, and also within the whole, for us it's 6 concerts, the whole 6 concert season is also what we're about. Balancing, eras of composers from 21st century to Baroque composers. How many German Romantic pieces are there? How many French pieces? How many South American? How many? There are all these different agendas that we have to keep in mind, and it's really it's an art, because you have to have a feel for the audience and what your audience wants. And one thing that I think absolutely is continuing from the Dixon days is a trust that our audience has. They may not know every piece that I've programmed on a season, but they have come to trust me and us that we're going to present it, first of all, with great passion and with great musicality and with great conviction. But also and they may not like it, they may like it, but they know they're going to get something very interesting and thought-provoking, and they know that it's somehow going to work on a program. There's going to be balance in the program, and so somehow it's going to comment, or it's going to be a new experience for them. And I mean, just in this past season, the past 2 masterworks, we've had world premieres, and of various ways. One with an amazing Chinese dance troupe, another with our principal cellist Hannah Holman. And that's kind of part and parcel for what we do, playing the tried and true, the Rite of Spring with this. Now the Rite of Spring is an old piece, thankfully. But the Rite of Spring with this new commission, and the Beethoven symphonies, and so it's really about balance within the program and within the season. I mean, I haven't even talked about the monetary aspects of it too. You can't have Mahler 8 6 times, and so we have to, the size of the orchestra, the number of musicians employed, there are all these factors that come into play. The expense of the guest soloists, if there's soloists sorry, I'm just going on and on here.
No,
I mean, there are just so many factors that come into play, and it really is, it's a work in progress. And so I keep a list of things. I keep a list of kind of the big masterworks pieces that I think we need to cover in the course. And then I keep a guest artist list, and I keep different lists of how things are going to combine. And I have in my back pocket, I have 8 or 10 programs ready to go. And so if we need in the course of a season, we haven't had 20th century Russian, whatever. We haven't had Shostakovich in a while. We haven't had, whatever. And so we keep all these things in mind and then try to create a balance over the six concerts.
Is there, obviously all QCSO programs are great, but is there a program this season where you feel like you really nailed the balance that you're aiming for?
Well, I mean, the two I just talked about, actually. I mean, honestly, it's been a great past couple of years, actually. I mean, the programming and the audience response to it, and I think the balance has worked really, really well. We had Angel Lam is a contemporary composer born in Hong Kong, now lives in America, and we had through the League of American Orchestras, we were the lead commissioning orchestra for a piece that originally wasn't supposed to be a dance piece, but as it turned out, through connections, I had conducted an opera by Bright Sheng up here in Minneapolis and met this amazing Chinese choreographer, and anyway, through all sorts of connections, it became a piece that eventually was going to become a dance piece. And so this amazing piece about the Mongol caves became this dance piece. And so a dance company came in, and it just happened that we already had the Rite of Spring, like the ultimate dance piece, programmed on the second half. And like I didn't know it was going to be a dance piece back when the commission was happening. I knew we had the Rite of Spring on the second half. And so it just kind of really serendipitously happened that we ended up with two, amazing dance pieces. One with dancers, with like this Chinese dance troupe was just like off the charts, fantastic.
Yeah.
And then, one of the most important pieces in the whole opera is the Rite of Spring. And so that's and that just happens kind of serendipitously, that it turned out that way, and just like dumb luck. But that happens when you're open to new ideas and to opening, to composers and to commissions and things. And so things just kind of naturally happened in a really great way.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, so we've got lots of questions that conductors juggle with all of the different artists and support staff they're connected with. But when studying a regional orchestra like the Quad City Symphony Orchestra, you get a chance to see how orchestras really respond to the moments in which they are trying to stage performances. Right. So Dennis, can you tell us about how the QCSO came to start concerts with the Star Spangled Banner? This being one of those things that the moment sort of picks the music rather than the conductor?
That is definitely the case. The story goes, at least as relayed to me by several longtime members of the orchestra who unfortunately are no longer with us. The orchestra had a concert on Sunday, December 7, 1941. And those were 3:00 in the afternoon concerts at the Davenport Masonic Temple. And the particular guest soloist for that day was a soprano, Metropolitan Opera quality soprano named Dorothy Maynor. And she came out, and before the concert started, the word had spread of the bombing of Pearl Harbor. It had reached the mainland. So the audience knew what had transpired in Hawaii that morning, earlier on. And spontaneously, the orchestra and conductor decided that they would begin with the national anthem. And once that tradition was set, that has stayed with the orchestra ever since. There was a brief time in, it would have been the mid-1990s, that there was a discussion about moving it to where it only was played at the first concert of the season, which is what many, many orchestras do. And there was, so that was attempted, but it did not go well with the audience. So we backtracked, and the banner has resumed its place as the concert opener. I assume that's still the case, by the way. I was going to ask Mark that before we started.
It is.
Yeah.
We did pause. We had some COVID performances.
Right.
With limited audience, where like people shouldn't really sing.
Right.
And so we did pause it for those. But that's really the only time that we haven't opened a concert with the Star Spangled Banner.
Right.
Are there, so Mark, but also our other conductor, Hisham, are there other traditions you feel like have emerged in your time there, like the Star Spangled Banner opener?
Well, I'm the newest person to the QCSO. I mean, one of our other traditions is with Riverfront Pops and having that concert, the really extravagant evening conclude with not only Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture, the fireworks being displayed above the Leclerc Park, but also finishing with Sousa's Stars and Stripes, which is as quintessential American as you can get. So. I don't know how
Two
long
great
that is.
American pieces, the 1812 Overture,
Precisely.
right?
Precisely.
Which has nothing to do with America, actually. But
Sarah, if I could make one more little aside about the Star Spangled Banner,
Sure.
there was a time, this is during Dixon's era, would have been probably the early 70s. The principal trumpet at the time was John Beer, who was the faculty professor of trumpet at the University School of Music. And John was a great jokester. And so before the concert started, John passed the word around to the orchestra that everyone should play the parts that were on their stands in B major, not in the key of B flat, which is what they were written in. Unfortunately, half the orchestra did not get the word. So when Dixon cued the snare drum and everybody began, we had the banner opening with both B flat and B major at the same time. He was not amused. It took about 3 bars before everybody zoomed and dropped back down into B flat, and away we went. But that is one of the great stories about John Beer's jokester pulling on Jim Dixon.
Oh, that is an amazing story.
Yeah.
Also, perfect segue to thinking about the role that our musicians play, right, in our great concert programs. Mark, was there anything you wanted to add when it comes to planning programs in terms of how just the sheer numbers or who you have in the orchestra factors into what you're going to play?
I mean, there's just kind of the financial part of it is, you can't have a Mahler size orchestra 6 times. I mean, the budget just can't for that. And so we balance out. We have practical concerns like for the December concert, Centennial Hall at Augustana College is not available to us, and so we have to go to smaller stages. And so it's turned out in the past few years that the December concert has just kind of organically become a chamber-ish concert with a smaller orchestra because of the venue. So that's a factor that comes into but absolutely, I mean, the individual members of the orchestra, and now that I've been there, for 18 years, how well we all know each other. And, if there's I mean, honestly, when I'm programming a piece, I hear Ben Coelho, I hear playing the bassoon part, and I hear Andy Parker playing the oboe solos. And so, we have a very, very strong orchestra throughout. And so, I mean, I absolutely do think about the individuals and their individual virtuosity and skills when I program a piece. If you're doing Petrushka and you don't have a good first trumpet, then, well, you shouldn't do it, And don't do pictures and exhibition if you don't have a good, trumpet player or whatever. I mean, there's certain pieces that are so reliant on the skill and personality of the principals. Luckily, I don't have to program around anything because we have strength everywhere and we have amazing personalities and just, fantastic musicians. That being said, knowing that Hannah Holman will be playing the solo on William Tell Overture, that adds something to it, or that Nahav will play the solos on Heldenleben or whatever. I mean, I definitely keep the individuals of the orchestra in mind when programming. And as I said, luckily that's not a limitation at all. It's really wonderful to be able to do that.
Great. We're lucky to have some musicians who can tell us about what it's like to join an ensemble like the QCSO. We'll start with the then. Dennis, you want to tell us about how you came to audition for QCSO and what that process looked like?
Oh, well, it's very long ago for one thing.
Or whatever you can
hard to
remember.
It was, I was a graduate student in the music school, and I wanted to play in the orchestra. I was playing in the university orchestra, and I knew Dixon through that. There was an opening in percussion section, so I auditioned with 2 other fellows, and we were both taken. for two positions in the orchestra. The auditions were very easy at that point. There was no screen. We just walked in and played a few excerpts that were prepared from various pieces and left the room. And 10 to 15 minutes later, we got the word, "Yep, you're in." I think it's a different process now. It evolved as I was working for the orchestra into a far more formalized way of hearing with a committee, with a screen that would protect the anonymity of the decision making, so that which those are standards that I think are still followed in most orchestras around the country. So that was my experience back then.
Yeah, and that's honestly something that's been wonderful to learn about as an instructor at the School of Music, is how Dixon would try to leverage his position with both the university and Quad
Right.
Cities to create as many opportunities as possible for
Right.
young
Well,
musicians.
about half of the orchestra then was local musicians from in the Quad City area, many of whom had started at Iowa, and so knew the orchestra from that, or had been in the youth programs, gone to Iowa for graduate degrees or things, and then returned to teach in the public schools. So about half the orchestra had that background, and the remaining half were faculty members and graduate students at Iowa and also Western Illinois. So that was the sort of the makeup of the orchestra then. I know it has evolved now, and we actually cast our net wider in the 90s to include Northern Illinois and also some freelancers who were in the Chicago area who would drive out.
Great, thanks. So Ben, using your experiences, you want to tell us a little bit about what this process looks like now, or now-ish?
Well, now is a little different than the way I did. Mine was a little bit similar to what Dennis talked about. There was no screen, and it was already from 2010, so it was a while back. But now we have the screen and the committee, and the process is what most orchestras do around the world. So for the better or the worse, that's the way it is. And I think improvements have happened, and I think more opportunity has shown up to people that probably wouldn't get those jobs before then.
For our younger students that might be on the call, you want to give us the broad strokes of what that process is?
Sure. Well, the orchestra sends out the announcement. You have the repertoire list, and then they come in, they draw a number when they come in at first. So we, the committee, only deal with numbers. So candidate number 1, 2, 3, and 4. And this last audition we had groups of 7 players at one time. And so they
And
play
we're behind a
3, 4
screen. We're behind the committee's
behind
behind
the
the
screen,
screen.
exactly.
So no one can see who's on stage playing, what gender, how old, what nobody knows anything except what they hear.
What exactly? And we don't even hear them walk in. We can't even tell because people are very careful about trying to not reveal if they're a woman or a man or big or small. So it's and then they play, and then the committee decides if any of those candidates will advance to the next round. So and then we had the clarinet audition, the last one I participated in. So we had 30 candidates total. So we had several rounds in the first round, and then in the end we had 5 finalists, and the whole process went behind the screen till we picked the winner, and then we invited the winner to meet us. And so I think it's pretty similar the ways now. The thing is really hard to play in a stage by yourself behind a screen, and sometimes you hear somebody's voice on the back. Can you play again a little bit faster? And it can be it's different. And I would advise students to practice that when they are practicing for an audition, to actually get their friends and create a curtain. And so that experience is not so at the time you're there, And when we had auditions at the Adler Theater, it's a very big hall. So the acoustics is very different when people are practicing in their practice rooms, which the kind of sound that they have is very different. So it's a challenge for everybody, the audition process. I'm not gonna lie about that, but we've been very successful. As Mark was mentioning, we have an amazing orchestra. He can program anything he wants, so we have the players to play those pieces, and it's a great thing. And I feel that my experience since 2010 being fantastic. And I had heard about the University of Iowa and the orchestra way back when I lived in Brazil, because I taught a university in Brazil where many of our professors there did their graduate work here at Iowa. And to me back then, anything west of Mississippi was related to my youth watching American Westerns, like the fastest guns west of the Mississippi. So it was a very far away place. And here I am now 28 years later, I'm here. But also I'm very grateful that I've been following a lineage of amazing people that have been there before me, and especially Ronald Tyree, who was the principal bassoon of the orchestra. And actually I sit in the endowed chair by him and his wife Beverly. So I sit with much pride in that seat every time I sit in the orchestra. And also here at the university, I came in after he retired. So it's a really win-win situation for me and working with all my colleagues, and so it's a wonderful thing.
Speaking of tradition, the youth group has been a big part of the QCSO tradition for a long time. Hisham, can you tell us about what this process of auditioning and joining the youth ensembles looks like?
Well, it's a lot less strenuous than what is described for a professional role. But nowadays, with the advent or with the ability to record and send video, through YouTube or whatever, the Dropbox, we have implemented, I don't know for how many years, recorded auditions. So students go to our website, they see the excerpts for the different level orchestras, and they discuss with their private teachers which orchestra might make sense for them as it pertains to their current ability. And then they record their audition and send it in. And our job, they're not behind a screen for us, so we see every student and in their video. And our goal in our committee when we put kids in different orchestras is to put them in where we believe they're going to not only excel, but also be challenged musically, technically, and with, little regard to having perfect balance in the orchestra. I mean, in the top group, I have 6 flutes. I mean, that's not at all standard, and it makes it difficult to work with, but there's 6 flutes that deserve to be in that orchestra and are students, so we take them in that way. So.
Well, and just from an audition standpoint, for sure, COVID changed everything, because it used to be for youth orchestra auditions, the conductors would be there and kids would, over 12 hours, horrendously long days, people would, trudge in and out and have their 5-minute audition, and but because of COVID, everything changed, and because of technology, now pretty much every young musician has the ability and has the equipment, which isn't like prohibitively expensive, to actually make a decent recording of themselves. And so we see all sorts of things in these auditions, kids in their socks in their bedroom, and you see like posters behind them, and you see all sorts of things.
The dog walking.
Kind of like you see, no, exactly. But the dogs, the dog, but it has eased, I think, has relaxed things some, but it also has allowed the auditioners to get a real picture of what they're hearing. I mean, the downside is you don't hear it live. And there's nothing that can replace you experiencing someone's sound or someone's presence live. And so that's what we lose. But what we gain is just, first of all, more equity. I think everybody now has the opportunity to audition. If they're not available on the single audition day, they can put it in. For the judges, they don't have to sit for 12 hours in a row. They can really take their time to judge things and place people. And so the technology is really a game changer as far as youth orchestra auditions for us. And I think it really opens the door for for people who aren't in the Quad Cities necessarily. They can from outside to audition and come in. Anyway, it's just a really wonderful development. It's one of the positive things that developed because of all the things we had to do during COVID.
Sure. Does anybody want to gaze into their crystal ball and think out loud about what these processes might look like in the future? If you expect any major changes or anything like that? All right. Well, we can just move right along then.
I was trying to think of something brilliant to say, but like,
Nope.
yeah, no, I mean, I don't think so. But who anticipated this? Nobody
Sure.
anticipated
Yeah.
I never thought we wouldn't do live auditions for the youth orchestra, but that's how it's turned out, and it's actually turned out really nicely. I don't think professional orchestras will ever do that because, like I said, it's so important to be in the room with the sound and with the
Yeah.
person. And that's the thing about like what Ben was talking about with the screen. It's auditioning and playing and doing the job are kind of two different things. But in order to this, it's an imperfect way, but that's the only way we have to judge people. But for them to be able to put through the screen, basically put their sound and put their personality through the screen, I mean, that takes a big player and a big approach. And so that's a challenge, I think, for auditionees to be able to sell themselves or to put their artistry, when they don't see the people they're performing for. It like Ben said, students and auditioners have to train themselves to get in that right mentality to do that effectively.
One thing I may add for the younger people auditioning is that when we have 30 clarinetists auditioning, how many of them could actually do the job really, really well? I think there's several that could have done the job really, really well. So an audition is like as we've been talking about, an imperfect process, but we do get the winner that the majority of the committee agrees that it is the best player at that day, at that moment, playing those exactly excerpts. If it's raining, like for we that play reed instruments, that it can change the whole outcome of an audition based in what the weather outside is like, because of how your reed is going to work.
Nothing worse than having to fight against your instrument.
Right. Well, and there's so many fine players, like Ben said. Any one of 5 or 6 could do the job, and so there are so many factors. So it is imperfect, but nobody's thought of a better way. And
Sure.
there really isn't a better way that's equitable, that doesn't close doors. It's not who you know, it's how you play. And so anyway, so I don't know. What auditions will be like in 20 years, I don't know if they'll be much different, to be honest.
Right, well, so we've talked a bit now about the process of programming. To dig into a little bit of what I've been able to piece together as a sense of Dixon's programming philosophy, I've got some nuggets of wisdom that I've collected in my research that I'm going to read aloud, both for our panelists and for those listening along. And then we'll just kind of reflect on both what we think these ideas mean in practice and whether or not they're still relevant today. So starting first with how Dixon approached preparing individual works, the phrase, "take away the tarnish of time that has built up on the music," appears regularly. In practice, this sometimes meant, quote, casting aside all the performance traditions added by intervening generations of conductors and placing oneself as conductor, quote, as closely as possible to the original intentions of the composer. So both for our conductors and our musicians, can you talk about what this means to you in practice, if anything?
Maybe I'll jump in real quick with my young perspective of that as
Sure.
a relatively young conductor. I mean, I couldn't agree more. And Dixon was probably writing that at the time when recordings were so made. They're not as accessible as they are today, but very much so. So I don't want to say expectation to sound like somebody else maybe was developing at that time, and certainly it intensified. So I mean, now it's really about being able to distance yourself from those traditions and those different conductors and come to a score of Beethoven that has been played thousands, hundreds of thousands of times, and try to see it in your own way as Beethoven might have done so. With new music, it's very easy, obviously, because there's no recordings and there's no tradition. but I think it's about distancing oneself from the, the phone, the recording, and just being one with the score in front of you and a piano and figuring it out and the context of the composer's life and seeing it in its pure form.
Thank you.
I think Dixon referred to it sometimes as removing the incrustations of time.
Seen that too. Yep.
Yeah, to find the what was the core, the nugget, the original thought. And that's hard to do when you go back 200 years or so. Okay, what does this marking here in the score really mean? Or is this a printer's mistake? Trying to get past some of those interpretations that people have made in the past based upon assumptions of the day. The two types of 19th century, early 20th century representations of Beethoven through the German composer Furtwängler and Italian composer Toscanini, and how those two ideas of what the sound was, what the speed, the tempos were vastly different. But they were very highly respected renditions of the time. And, you had warring people who would, disavow one for the other. And I'm sure there are still those kinds of things today. Mark can address that, I'm sure.
Well, I mean, I totally agree with Dixon's aesthetic there, saying we're trying to achieve the composer's intentions, but like that's the big what are the composer's intentions? Because that doesn't mean that we just totally divorce ourselves from the interpretation. That doesn't mean we just play what's on the page, because Beethoven wrote forte for every single instrument all the time. Like 45 bars in a row, forte trumpets, forte timpani, forte, and that can't happen. If you're going to hear
Right.
Beethoven's intentions, if you're going to hear the melody, then the trumpets have to hit it and then drop down to mezzo piano, or the timpani can't remain fortissimo. I mean, there are all sorts of niceties, there are all sorts of interpretive things that I believe are the composer's intentions. I believe the composer intended the melody to be heard, or I believe the composer intended this to have great energy, or whatever. I mean, there's so many things that you have to read into the score and then make adjustments. You have to say, well, no, the trumpets can't be forte here. The trumpets have to be mezzo piano, or whatever the case is. I mean, in Baroque music, there's so much the composers don't tell us. They don't even tell us tempo marking sometimes. They don't give any dynamics. Bach, Brandenburg Concerto, there's nothing. Like, is a forte, is a piano? So what are the composer's intentions? And what one person thinks are the intentions and another can be totally different, while still seeking those intentions with pure motives. And so it's about your experience, it's about your scholarship. It is about knowing about past traditions and not categorically adopting them because that's how everybody does it. I mean, it is being open to rethinking, but it's really easy to say, I'm just playing what the composer said to do, and you can't do that. Even with like control freaks like Mahler, there are all sorts of things you have to do. And Mahler was like the ultimate control freak who wrote everything in every single part. And because he was a conductor, working conductor, knew how things were going to go. But even then, there's still things that are mysterious. There are things you have to adjust. I mean, if you are being true to the composer and the intention of the composer, you absolutely have to insert yourself as an interpreter and as an organizer and as someone with the intention of bringing the composer's intentions to mind. And so, that it's just such a loaded question, and it's really easy to say, just play what's on the page. But that is absolutely never the case, that you can play what's on the page, ever.
Great insights. Thank you. Anybody else?
Well, like looking more like as a professor now, as a teacher of bassoon, with the so easy now to listen to so many recordings in YouTube and Spotify, and actually you get this more in terms of interpretative, not as playing the composer's intention, but it's playing and copying the interpreter's interpretation. So we have to be very careful that our students don't don't listen to record and say, oh, so and so that is so famous play that way, so it must be the right way. And through education, you can get to have your own ideas. And I think it's impossible to know what the composer's intentions are unless you know you have performance practice treatises and things like. When I was growing up playing Baroque music, it was more similar to play romantic music and Baroque music are one and the same. You get a lot of editions of Mozart bassoon concerto. That's almost feels like that it should be like a Brahms piece because we didn't have access to, well, the books were there. Leopold Mozart did write a treatise on performance practice, but it was not common practice in the early 20th century or first almost entire 20th century to go back to those sources and develop scholarship and try to figure out, oh, maybe we shouldn't play this way over here just because this edition says. So making choices, I think Dennis brought that up, of the copyist error in the score. And so, and if you think about popular music, right, when you listen to American Idol, when the judge goes, oh, you're trying to sing just like Ella Fitzgerald, but you can't. You have to create your own interpretation. And I think we classical musicians could use a little bit more of that as well, and you're not playing this exactly right. And so I'm sorry, I'm going back and forth all over the place to say
Right.
what is that the interpreter really wants to say, not copy somebody else. Be
Well, and
true
I
to
also
your
think,
interpretation.
right. I mean, I think especially for young musicians, it's a natural thing to imitate. I mean, that's kind of how you learn. Like when you're a jazzer, that's how you learn. Like you learn, the famous solos, and you imitate those. And I just worked with a cellist who was doing Dvorak cello concerto, and it's like he was doing all sorts of like funky things. Like, why are you doing that? Well, because he heard somebody do it that way. Well, if you give me a reason, you explain why. If you have a musical reason why you want to push here and do there, if where things aren't necessarily are written in the score, then we can talk. But like, I think it's natural that certainly young conductors do that. I imitated Claudio Abbado like when I was a young conductor because I thought he was like great, and I still do. But and so many young conductors, everybody imitates Carlos Kleiber, like the greatest conductor ever. Everybody imitates him. So it's kind of natural to want to do that, but then you have to get over that. Then you have to like synthesize the good things of that and think about what those good things are, and then make it your own. And that's when you become a mature interpreter, a mature musician. And so it's only natural. And now that there's Spotify, like Ben said, you have like 25 interpretations at your fingertips, which is a blessing and a curse, because you can say, well, go listen to, if you want to listen to the Shostakovich violin concerto, listen to the person who played it with Shostakovich, and you have that. And then you have everything in between, So it's almost like it's too much information in a way, but it also gives students access to, to things that like I was telling my students, it's like, back in the day we had to like go buy CDs or like actually buy records if we wanted to hear different interpretations. And like we could go to the library maybe, but we couldn't just push a button and say, I want one of 25 performances. So, it's for student musicians, it's fantastic to have such a plethora of options to listen to. But you have to be careful just to not become, like you said, imitating the interpreter, not realizing what you heard somebody else realize, not what the composer. So it's a long process.
So this is one of what I see as the highlights of the correspondence we have on display in the exhibit. So this is from Dixon's response to a diplomatically frustrated letter from somebody in the audience who was confused by all of the non-canonic selections that Dixon was starting to add to concerts. And so he at one point in his letter says, quote, "If we refuse to listen to new works, and please remember every work is new to its initial listeners, then music will die. It would have died long ago if everyone refused to give new work a chance." So what do you think this means today?
Well, I'm jumping in here. There's
Sure, yeah, go for
more
it.
qualified people than me to speak about those kind of things. But as a bassoonist, I play the bassoon. The repertoire for bassoon is not that extensive. Like I was just talking to a student yesterday that is playing a romantic sonata by Gustav Schreck. Who has ever heard of Gustav Schreck if you're not a bassoonist or an oboist? So it's what are you bringing to the table, right? Bringing new works. My CD recordings, I was out of all my CD recordings, only one was totally vanity. I did want to play transcriptions of Bach, Beethoven, and Brahms, and that's what I did, and Schumann. So I did non-bassoon works by those composers, but that was totally because I wanted to feel good about playing those musics that I don't naturally have as a bassoonist. But all other recordings is like, what is my contribution to bassoon and music? So I always searching for new repertoire. And like one of my CDs is a CD of trios for bassoon, saxophone, and piano. And one of my most proud CDs that I have is a whole CD of pieces for bassoon solo and choir. They're bassoon concertos accompanied by choir and not orchestra. So I think we have to survive, as Dixon said. I agree with that completely. We bassoonists will never play anything because we don't have. So just only playing transcriptions, and of course in orchestra we get great parts. So that's my take on that. That what is the contribution that I'm bringing to the world of music or the world that surrounds me? I think that's my goal is when I'm looking for a repertoire.
Great, thank you.
One of the early challenges that the Quad City Symphony faced was contemporary programming in the 1950s. There was a conductor who programmed for the very first time Bartók's Concerto for Orchestra. The audience and the board were not pleased with that piece. That would have been about 1954. And they decided that they would have to have the say-so over his programming from that day forward. So he was asked to submit his programs to the board members for a board committee to review and sign off on before they could be announced. He said no, and he quit after 2 years. So that kind of stumbling block, of the period of the 50s was certainly there. And Dixon ran into that, as this letter from this audience member, stated. So he stepped carefully, but at the same time, he was bringing in works that were written in the 60s and 50s, late 50s, early 60s. And many of those were very difficult works of that era. You didn't have the John Adams or Philip Glass type harmoniousness in a lot of these works. They were quite disjunct. They came out of a tradition that was more European post-war World War II, and the tonality was certainly not what people thought it was going to be. So those surprises did, ring a few bells for the audience members when Dixon would program them. But we got through it as an orchestra. And I remember when he programmed, I didn't hear it, but I see from the programs, he programmed Ligeti's Atmospheres. Well, it's a wild piece, and everybody who recognized it realized it had been part of the soundtrack to the movie 2001. So they could relate it in that sense. If it had been played cold that no one had ever heard, I think it would have been dead in the water from the performance. But the use in the movie sort of set it up, just that one case.
Well, and so part of our DNA continues to be to foster new works, like I mentioned earlier. It is a different world now.
Yeah.
And so the kind of new pieces that we're doing are different than Warren and different than some of the like really spiky stuff that was de rigueur, during that time. And so that does it make it easier for me in a way? Yes, because I mean, when I program these new works, like actually I have some of the biggest hits of the last couple of years have been new works. Michael Abel's opera Omar,
Right.
This new work by Angel Lamb. I can go through the list. Frankly, because that's what speaks to me. Like some of these, like I do say I would never bring to a Quad City Symphony program a piece that I didn't really believe in. Like I'm not just doing it to check a box. And so if there's some like piece that I can't relate to, or that I think doesn't sound good, or is ugly, or whatever, like I'm not going to bring it to our audience and to our orchestra just to do it. It has to be a piece that I think has value. Then that doesn't mean they're always pretty. That doesn't mean, it doesn't mean that I don't like gnarly pieces. But how does it work in the program? How does it work for our audience? I mean, I'm absolutely thinking about our audience and the audience experience all the time, while making sure that we do keep supporting composers. And so we find composers. We've had works by Michael Abels often, and like our audience loves his music, and he's come to visit the Quad Cities. We just had Becky Burkhardt from UNI come, and like she has a whole following from in the state of Iowa, basically. And so if people get to know the composers as people and believe in supporting them as artists, that also helps. And so we're doing a new cello concerto. Oh, I shouldn't. It's a secret. A Michael Abels cello concerto that we're going to actually, I think, premiere and record next season. So you develop these relationships with the composers. So the composer and the orchestra have a relationship, and the composer and the audience have a relationship, and similar to actually bringing a young guest artist. If we bring a young guest artist who has success, people want to see them come back, and they want to come back. I mean, Garrick Olson was one of those that Dixon brought in, as a super young pianist, and then would come back to the orchestra often and developed a relationship with the orchestra. And so that's something unique that an orchestra our size can do, I think. We're just small enough that we can do that and develop these like really individual relationships. And so that's a great thing. And so I think we as an organization, certainly the board supports the programming. Dennis, interestingly, I mean, there is a committee of the board now, the program advisory committee, that does indeed sign off on the program. So we kind of come up with it together. And like, I am not about cramming down anybody's throat, anything that people don't want to hear. And I think the board committee understands that too. And so we're at, after all these years, we're at a really nice place where everybody works together, and there's a trust. And there's also like, I don't want to break that trust. I'm not going to, lose my political capital by doing some, horrendously ugly piece that nobody's going to like. What's the point of that? I mean, people come to the orchestra to be enriched, to learn, to hear old things, to be challenged by new things, and that's what I want to keep happening in Quad.
Speaking of audience, I know from Sarah's message we've got some questions from the audience on our call today. Sarah, you want to give us some of those questions?
Yeah, and thank you all so much for your conversation. We've got a few questions from our guests here today. Someone asks, would you please talk more about Dixon? I played in youth orchestra when he conducted, and I have 3 family members in the photo used to advertise this event. I would love to hear some more memories from his era.
I guess that falls to me. Unfortunately, my relationship with the youth orchestra didn't really begin until about 1985. I was in the senior orchestra at that point, but didn't have any connection with the youth side of the programming. I remember as I had said earlier, the junior board volunteer group was the direct management arm for the youth orchestra program. That was part of their outreach mission. That they funded through projects to support the financial obligations of the youth orchestra, to include conductor salary. The challenge was always to get students from both sides of the Quad City, the Great Divide, the Mississippi River. The school programs in one side would be stronger in one type of instrument than the other. So there was always a balance of the Iowa side had this type of player, the Illinois side had another type. And the audition process was carefully done so that you had a representative balancing of the strengths of both sides, the school programs where these kids had come up through in the membership of the youth orchestra. The programming was often more of the pops variety, of course, because those are shorter pieces and sometimes they're a little simpler than full-fledged symphonic movements. But that, needless to say, that's not always the case. When Dan Culver conducted the youth orchestra, he did movements from Hindemith's Symphonic Metamorphoses. He commissioned a trumpet concerto from Libby Larsen, and was premiered by David Greenhoe, who was the Quad City Symphony principal trumpet at the time. So the youth orchestra has had, it's made its mark outside of the senior orchestra. That was a strength that they wanted to do at the time. As far as the players for the kids who were in the orchestra, the experiences. Dixon was a stern conductor. I think anybody who knew him knows that he didn't suffer fools lightly, as one person described him. But even though he was gruff, there was always a twinkle there in his eye. If he snarled a little bit or seemed to snarl, it was done with a wry joke at the end. And I hope the kids got that. The adults do, but I hope the kids understood that he wasn't wagging his finger too strongly at them. He was trying to lead them to greater things.
Thank you, Dennis. And I've just got a shout out to you from Dale Tolliver. He says hi.
Oh, well, hi, Dale. Long time no see.
Another question from our audience. What was the orchestra players' relationship like with James Dixon? You kind of touched on that just a little bit, Dennis, but if you've got any other stories or anyone else have things they've heard about Dixon's time.
Well, as I said, he didn't refer to players by first name in rehearsals. If he had a comment for the principal oboe, it wasn't Bob or Mary or whomever was the person holding the instrument. It was first oboe. Can you do this? Would you play this phrase such and such? So there was that professional distance that he maintained, certainly in the rehearsal situations. Dixon was not a social animal with the orchestra. He lived in Iowa City. He did not live in the Quad Cities. So when rehearsals and concerts were over, he may have hung around for a bit to greet audience members after, but then he left town and went home. So there wasn't a jocularity there with the players, other than a few, wry, humorous comments here and there during rehearsals. When the violins would hit a particularly rough patch, he would say, "You probably want to look at that before next rehearsal." And that would, people say, "Okay, pencils out, mark this." That kind of gentle, but serious statement. But people appreciated that, I think, to a large degree.
And another question on the Dixon front: in which composer did Dixon tend to specialize?
Without a doubt, Mahler. That was, of course, he had the Mahler medal. He was an early performer of Mahler, particularly with the universities where he started with that. And that he brought that forward into his care at the Quad City Symphony as well, to introduce people to this music that needed to be heard. In the 50s and 60s, of course, Mahler had faded from view, and only a few orchestras were still playing him. And then Leonard Bernstein helped to rekindle the Mahler candle, so to speak, and light it so that it has burned ever since very, very strongly. But Mahler was definitely Dixon's go-to when he could go to, because the resources that it takes to play Mahler always were, right up there. We did Mahler 8 with the University Orchestra, and that was quite an event all the way around.
Dennis, you have another shout out from Kathy Hall, an enthusiastic.
Hi, Kathy.
So There was mention that the movie music made atmospheres more acceptable to audiences. Do you capitalize on those popular influences like movies and pop music, et cetera, when developing programs for those folks who are conducting now?
For sure. It depends on how. I mean, and the trend for all of our industry now is orchestras playing films, or playing the soundtracks of films while the films play. That is, it's in a way, it's kind of taken the place of pops concerts. We used to have kind of, evening pops concerts, and now films are. I mean, we're a visual society now. Let's face it. Which is, we could have another webinar about that for an hour and a half. But so now being able to combine the great film scores, John Williams, et cetera, with the films themselves is a really great way to introduce people to the orchestra, kind of like pops concerts used to be. But yes, if there's a theme, if there's a famous classical piece that's been used in some film, I mean, absolutely, our marketing department plays that up without question. If there's a famous birthday coming up of let's say John Williams, maybe there's going to be a whole program, around John Williams music, which is really diverse in and of itself. It's not just all Star Wars. John Williams has a huge variety of stylistic possibilities. So anyway, so for sure we don't turn our backs on popular culture, and we try to use it to our advantage as much as we can programmatically, I think.
That speaks a bit to another question that's very related, which is, are there any pieces that are known hits with audience members? Few.
Beethoven 9.
Yeah.
If that, like we say, when you look at the box office receipts, well, let's just do Beethoven 9 6 times. That'll be our masterwork season. But I don't know. At time number 4, would the audience stop coming? Like, I don't know. But Beethoven 9 is one of them. I mean, Carmina Burana is hugely popular. Choral pieces sell very well. What other, like, just Beethoven 5, that has been a big seller for us. The ones that people can hum, those sell really well. But a lot of times people, there are pieces that people know, but they don't know what they are necessarily. Like, maybe they know the New World Symphony, they know Going Home, but they haven't heard it in context in the Dvorak Symphony. And so, I love those moments where, or there's Rachmaninoff Piano Concerti where that happens too, where, the audience like turns knowingly to themselves, or you hear the audience go, I know this, So, I would say, as far as for box office, Beethoven 9 is really hard to beat. And Carmina Burana, I would probably say a close second to that. But it's not just all about selling tickets, although that's not unimportant.
We've got just one more audience question, and then I know Sarah has an additional question to wrap things up today about some upcoming performances. So someone is asking, what work is being done to include more works by women?
Well, we're extremely intentional about underrepresented and women composers. I mean, about programming works by that. I mean, it's absolutely on the forefront, especially, obviously, we're talking about contemporary composers. I mean, there were, a handful of famous composers, female composers from the past, whose music we also play. But it absolutely is at the forefront of when we're talking about what new pieces we're going to introduce in our season, and how we can make sure that is addressed, because it is absolutely something that is vitally important for equity's sake and other reasons as well. But yeah, it's at the forefront of our discussions in these. Certainly, when I'm talking with Hisham, when I'm talking with Brian Baxter about upcoming seasons, and I frankly rely on. I of course know the music that I know, but there's so much that I don't, and so I rely on trusted colleagues to say, hey, listen to this piece. Well, this is a great composer. You should listen to her music. It's something that I think people know that I welcome and that I expect. And yeah, it's definitely something that's at the forefront of our decision making.
I might add that that's also the same mindset that we harbor in the youth orchestras. not only teaching the tried and true, but I mean, every year, last year we did a piece by a living American female composer with the youth orchestra. This piece, my YPO has another one. I mean, it's something that we take down to the beginning stages of music education as well.
Right, and it's important that when we do, it's part and parcel to what we do. It's not an exception. That and for the young students, that's a really valuable lesson. It's like they're composers of all sorts of genders and ethnic backgrounds, and I mean it's the world is wide open as far as that goes, and we teach that from the get go, like Hisham said.
And Sarah, I know you've got one final question today about upcoming performances for our guests.
Yeah, obviously. So we convened our conversation today to help encourage folks. If you're interested in seeing more about Dixon's various life experiences, definitely check out the exhibit. But if you're looking for a Dixon style concert, our upcoming Masterwork 6 concert, April 11th and 12th, correct? If you haven't yet bought tickets, would be a Dixon style concert in that it prominently features Mahler. And so for our assembled panel here, so Dennis told us all about how Mahler was very important to Dixon and his important role in moving Mahler from the column of lesser known composers, at least in the United States, into some of our keystone pieces that we think about. What does it mean for you all to be playing Mahler today?
Well, I guess I'll try.
Go for it.
Yeah, I mean, Mahler, for an orchestra, for a conductor, for an audience, I mean, he is just the master musical psychologist. And the way he uses sounds and the way he uses musical memory and psychological memory and is masterful. And I think he's popular because he speaks so directly. He speaks directly through these musically psychological means of distant chimes, of cowbells, of all these kind of connotations and memories of oral memories. He does that within the context of the symphony as well. We have marches, we have fanfares, we have klezmer music, we have breathtaking choral music, we have just the highs and lows. And Mahler has said, like, I want the symphony to portray everything. I want a symphony to portray the world, and the highs of the world and the lows of the world, and love and anger and passion. I mean, he's covering everything, and that's why I think he speaks to people now. I mean, what is a little unusual is that, like, his symphonies are long, and that is very countercultural now. And we're such a visual society, and sound bites are 35 seconds. And so that takes we're really countercultural in that way. But as far as the vividness, as far as the experience, as far as sitting in a place and feeling something and taking a journey, there's no other composer like Mahler. And so it's a thrill for a conductor. I think it's a thrill for an orchestra. I mean, he challenges an orchestra to the nth degree, just instrumentally and psychologically and endurance wise. And so you just take a magical journey, and if counterculturally you allow yourself to sit there and take the 65-minute journey of Mahler Symphony No. 6, then on the other side of it, you are a different person. And we've collectively done this together, and that's something that I think as humans we need to do, have these communal experiences and experience the highs and lows through a great artist like Mahler. I mean, it's not hyperbole to say. I mean, it's a unique experience to listen to Mahler 6 or Mahler 2 or Mahler 8 or whatever. He's just one of those amazing artists, for the ages.
All right. Well, I think that about wraps up our time for today. Many thanks to you all so much for moderating and joining in this panel and sharing your experiences and stories with others. And thank you all for spending your lunch break with us today, who are tuning in from all over the U.S. So please do check out Quad City Symphony Orchestra's upcoming performances of Mahler. Visit their website and see those. Let's see, we've got Saturday, April 11th, and Sunday, April 12th. So that's coming right up. And if you get a chance, pop by Iowa City, the main library gallery, to see our Dixon exhibition. Thank you all and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.